actions that are in violation of the Constitution, they're in violation of federal law, and they're doing this in a dark room and without public input. And as Democratic attorneys general across this country, we made a commitment to come together and hold town halls in states across this country to be able to provide the public input that the president is purposely choosing to ignore, and give an opportunity to hear from the public about what the impacts of those decisions, those same decisions that are being made in the dark. One of the first hearings that we had, I felt very privileged to be able to go to Arizona and be with my partner, A.G. Mays in Arizona, participate in that town hall where we heard about food insecurity, whether it was the farmers planting the foods, all the way to individuals that absolutely need food in their lives in context of food insecurity. We heard from veterans. We heard from TSA agents. Broad sweeping, we heard was incredibly impactful for me was a superintendent from one of your schools that stood up and talked about recruitment and retention and the grants that are being shut off. And so that's the purpose of these forums. Our first forum was yesterday in Eugene, Oregon. This is the second forum, and we'll have a few other after this. But with that, I will go ahead and turn it over to A.G. Mays.
Thank you, Attorney General Rayfield. It's great to be here. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it. So as the Attorney General just said, we are doing these town halls. This is our third of a series of town halls that we're going to be having across the nation. After we had the town hall in Phoenix, we then went up to Minneapolis and heard many of the same things that we heard in Phoenix, and I suspect we're going to hear tonight, which is people of all different political stripes and backgrounds saying that they are extremely concerned, worried about, angry about the actions by the Trump administration to violate our Constitution, and act in frankly illegal and unconstitutional ways. And so it is our jobs as attorneys general to stand up for the law, to uphold the law, and to push back in every way we possibly can when Washington, D.C. does something that's unconstitutional. So that's what we're doing. We have now filed together as AGs more than a dozen lawsuits. In the case of Arizona, we have, as of today, filed 12 lawsuits against Donald Trump, Elon Musk, and Doge. And, we believe the people of Arizona and Oregon are with us in this. And I think, that bears out in the numbers of people who are coming to our town halls, and it certainly bears out in the protests that we saw, in the last, I think it was last weekend, both here in Oregon and in Arizona. So we're going to continue. I did not run for office so that I could sue Donald Trump. It's not why I ran for office, but this is where we're at with an unconstitutional and often illegal presidency that seems hell-bent on destroying 250 years of American government. So with that, we'd be glad to take your questions.
Can you tell us what comes next? I understand this past week we got a not-so-favorable ruling in response to a lawsuit. I believe this involved Maryland, this lawsuit. What comes next?
Yeah, I think the first kind of right now, what you want to think about in the broader context, we're involved in, as we say, 12 plus lawsuits as Democratic attorneys general. What you know nationwide, it's more than 100 lawsuits that have been filed against the Trump administration. For Democratic attorneys general, during the first Trump administration, one thing to always keep in mind is we won about 80% of those lawsuits. Right now, in almost all of those cases, we've received multiple positive rulings from Democratic judges as well, and most importantly, from Republican judges exercising judicial independence, which is an incredible feature of our democracy. And so there are some cases right now where you're seeing some rulings that are coming down where they are, what I would say, finite, where one of them I think you saw where there is a venue issue, right? And they would have preferred a lawsuit to have been filed in Texas where the ruling wasn't necessarily on the merits. There are some other types of rulings that are really looking at when can we do temporary restraining orders and when are those appropriate. A lot of these decisions right now are not necessarily on the merits of the cases, and so these will take time to move through the courts. We do not file lawsuits if we do not believe and we do not have facts to show that the Constitution has been violated as well as the laws in our country.
The other thing I would add to that is, to what the Attorney General just said, is that, I think it's important to note that in almost every one of the lawsuits that we have filed, we have gotten a temporary restraining order. And that is really hard to do. I mean, that is a significant thing that a federal judge, in almost every single one of these cases, has issued a TRO pausing or stopping what the Trump administration is doing. Whether that's, us being able to get Elon Musk kicked out of, and Doge kicked out of the Treasury Department, or getting a TRO in the federal funding freeze case, it's really significant. And it means that that a judge is saying we're more likely than not to win on the merits of the case at the end of the day. And so I just want to note that. And, we'll see, as the Attorney General said, last time around during Trump 1.0, the AGs won 80% of their cases. We're not going to win every single one of these. But, you show me someone who never loses, and I'll show you somebody who isn't trying hard enough.
With several lawsuits being filed against the Trump administration's actions, how much of this battle can really be fought in court, in your opinion?
So I think the first stage of what's going on right now requires attorneys general to hold the line when it comes to enforcing our Constitution. What you are going to see, and part of the rationality of why we're here today when we talk about public input, when you make budget reductions, you don't do that in the dark of the night. You do that with public input so we can have gives and takes and we understand what is appropriate for our country. And so what I do expect, as we are winning these lawsuits, I do expect this conversation to switch to Congress, as they then try and grapple and do it the right way, do it with public input, and make informed decisions on how we should govern our country. But you don't do it via an executive order. You don't do it via a stroke of a pen and try and change law in an unlawful way.
Yeah, absolutely. And, as the Attorney General just said, almost all of these cases come down to an issue regarding the separation of powers. I mean, we are talking about a president who thinks he's a king. We don't have kings in this country. We have separation of powers, and we have three branches of government: the judiciary, the executive, and the legislature, and Congress. To answer your question, this obviously the Democratic AGs are waging this battle in the courts, but this goes beyond the courts, and it has to go beyond the courts. I call it the 3 C's. We have to win in the courts. We have to have crowds, and that means the people of Oregon and Arizona and America stand up for their rights, and we need courage. So crowds, courts, and courage, and we're going to make it through this very difficult time.
How are you helping the hold the line, as the governor put it today, when it comes to the Oregon Department of Education and the DEI policies? There was something, the Trump administration handed down. You have to certify you're in compliance, and basically ODE, from what I understand today, said we are in compliance and we're not getting rid of DEI in our schools.
It's a very simple way to think about this. The laws have not changed on this issue before Trump got into office, and they haven't changed afterwards. We were in compliance before, and we're in compliance now with the current laws of the land. And that is the way we're approaching it, and I'm assuming, I haven't seen the governor's statement, but I assume that that's what she's referencing.
And I know you guys were in Eugene yesterday, where a few students' visas were revoked, and then also at OSU. I mean, what is your reaction to this? I mean, it just seems more fuel to the fire here.
I think in Oregon, and I can't speak for Arizona, we have been first watching this in other states. Yesterday was the first time that we learned at U of O that students have been impacted. I learned today that students at PSU have been impacted, and I've also learned that students at Oregon State University have been impacted as well. It's deeply concerning. The facts that I'm hearing cause me to be incredibly skeptical about the lawful nature in which this is being accomplished. And so we're still in the early stages of learning exactly what has transpired before really convening and having further, I think, conversations on what the best next steps are.
What's your reaction to the federal appeals panel clearing access for DOJ to have access to sensitive information after an injunction was filed to stop that? What's your reaction to that now that the path is now clear for DOJ to have that access to sensitive information?
Are you talking about, is this the IRS case or?
In regards to just DOJ having access to federal workers.
Oh, I see, yeah, yeah. Well, look, I mean, I think as, you know, Attorney General Rayfield said, this is a process. Each one of these cases is a process. We're not going to win at every single stage, but we're going to continue to fight. We're going to continue to assert our position. And we'll see where the United States Supreme Court ends up in each one of these cases, each one of the DOJ cases. At the end of the day, the United States Supreme Court is going to have to decide whether it still believes in the Constitution, whether it still believes in America, and whether it still believes in the separation of powers. We shall see.
Since the Trump administration took office, has your day-to-day changed? Were there things that you guys normally would be working on that have had to take a back seat? If so, what?
I think in difficult times it brings people together very closely. I feel very fortunate to have amazing partners in our Democratic Attorneys General across this country who are working incredibly hard, sharing resources, which is absolutely essential. To do what we're doing, it requires all of the states' cooperation and participation to be able to fight these battles. So I feel very heartened that we come together as a group of individuals to talk about the emerging issues. We have staff working on that. The reality for most of our offices, though, is we still have the same set of responsibilities. Every day that I wake up, Oregonians all across Oregon expect us in the Department of Justice to make sure we're delivering child support to families that desperately need it. They are not going to take no for an answer when it comes to public safety. So we have to function and do the core responsibilities of the Department of Justice, while at the same time we have incredible people in Oregon and across this country, but specifically that I can speak to the Department of Justice and the employees who work there, who are spreading themselves thin to do extra work to do this federal accountability and oversight work that you see going on right now, almost on a weekly basis.
I would say the same for Arizona. I mean, we have people at the Arizona Attorney General's office who are working overtime on these cases, who are putting in time at night and time over the weekends, and are committed to helping to save our republic. And that's where we are right now. This is about saving the republic. And so, people are committed to doing everything that they need to do. The other interesting thing is that I've gotten to know Dan basically by Zoom because we meet together. All 23 AGs basically meet together by Zoom almost every day now. And so I actually talk about that often publicly because people find it encouraging that we do, number one, we like each other, and that we work well together, and that we are working in concert, all 23 of us across the country, stretching time zones from Hawaii all the way to New York on these cases. And that's how we're able to accomplish so much, is because we can lean on each other. And it's no one state doing all of the work.
I think the interesting things that we've learned in the Zoom conversations, and also being around each other, is that in terms of attorneys general, we're the funniest, and we're just
Maybe not us specifically.
No, we are.
Oh, you think
yeah,
we are?
Yeah,
Oh,
we're
okay.
a delight. AG.
I don't know. Nestle's pretty funny, but Michigan's pretty funny. But anyway.
So you were in Eugene yesterday. You said you were in Minneapolis. I watched the one in Arizona. What are some of the biggest issues that people are bringing to your attention when you hear from them, or even on these Zoom calls, I mean, what are some of the key things that you're focusing on?
Jimmy, you've been to more of the national ones than I have.
Yeah, so I mean, these town halls, and today is going to be really interesting to see what the folks in Oregon have to say about this. But these have been very emotional and, frankly, in some cases, heart-wrenching town halls. We have had many, many federal workers come forward and say, I got the fork in the road email. I just got fired. In Phoenix, we had a woman who does music therapy for veterans who have PTSD come forward and say, I just got fired, and 80 veterans in Phoenix aren't going to get their music therapy because I got fired. Illegally, by the way. And we worked hard to get her job back for her, and all 25,000 of those probationary workers who got fired. And so, you know, and then in Minneapolis, we had a woman who also was a veteran and also worked for the VA get up, and she stood with the IED that had exploded near her, giving her a brain injury. And she said, I just got the fork in the road email. I was just told that I am no longer a federal employee and that I wasn't doing a good job, even though my last review was glowing. And it's those kinds of stories that, you know, number one, we need to hear as AGs, because ultimately sometimes they can end up as evidence in our lawsuits. But number two, the people of our states need to hear these stories so that we can explain why these lawsuits are so important. Explain what it means to real people, to the people of this state, that these harms are real to people, to real people. And so that's what we're hearing at these town halls. Every single one of them, we hear stories like that. And then, as the Attorney General said, impacts to farmers and other people who were promised a contract by the federal government that the food would go to schools or in a particular state, and then that contract summarily got pulled.
I think the thing that I would note is there's a lot of really interesting, like, individual stories, but it's the breadth of the stories. There was something when I went to Arizona for the first town hall, that is what I was struck with when I walked away. From agriculture to food to education to vet services, privacy, civil rights. It is, it's the fabric of all the things that we take for granted in a healthy democracy. It was absolutely mind-boggling to see that breadth. We saw it yesterday as well with the people coming forward, and I'll be very interested to see what happens tonight too.
I have a viewer question that I'm going to paraphrase. The viewer is asking why use taxpayer dollars to file lawsuits that feel partisan, that may not make it through a Supreme Court.
Yeah, and the first thing that I would say is you think about whether following the Constitution is partisan. It absolutely isn't. My dad's a Republican. My mother's a Green Party member, and I always joke that neither of them were able to vote for me in the primary. But the truth of the matter is, both of them firmly agree. It doesn't matter whether you're a Democratic president or a Republican president, what you are not above, because you're an incredibly powerful human being, you're not above following the Constitution. You're not above following federal law. And the backstop in a democracy, when you do not have elected officials following the law, are attorneys general. It is an independent judiciary. It is an inherent responsibility of this office. In fact, when I ran for this position, we always would talk about enforcing our values here in Oregon and enforcing the rule of law. So I talked about this for more than a year. I was hopeful that we wouldn't be here today, but we are, and it's an essential responsibility of all attorneys general. I don't care if you're a Republican attorneys general or you're a Democratic attorneys general.
Yeah, and I would add, well, look, for most of my life, I was a Republican. I switched parties in 2019, so I'm a new Democrat, actually. And I have many, many Republicans in my state. And we have had many Republicans come to these town halls, hundreds and hundreds calling my office, outraged about the fact that DOJ has gotten access to their personal information. Now we are seeing dozens and dozens of people reporting to my office, including Republicans and independents and Democrats, that they've had disruptions in their Social Security checks, that they've seen that the Social Security computer is freezing on them, that people at Social Security are hanging up on them, or they're being hung up on when they try to get their Social Security put into place. These are real stories, and they're not coming from just Democrats. They're coming from everybody. And so, and as the Attorney General said, you know, and again, as a former Republican, I can remember a time when it was Republicans who, you know, stated loudly that they were the party of the Constitution, of, that stood up for the Constitution. We all have to stand up for the Constitution. And the last thing I'll say is this. An interesting thing is starting to happen in some of the cases that we're bringing, which is that some judges are starting, federal judges are starting to say, hey, should I issue a nationwide injunction covering all the states, or should I just issue an injunction covering the states that the plaintiffs are in other words, the Democratic attorneys general? Because we're the ones bringing the cases, leaving the Republican AG's states out in the cold because they didn't bring these cases. In fact, just before I came over here to join with you guys, I was watching a news report on the governor, the fact that the governor of New Hampshire is flailing around trying to figure out how to get the funds that that New Hampshire lost because their AG didn't bring the lawsuit that we brought, and we saved the money. This AG saved that money for your state, but because there was a Republican AG who didn't enter our lawsuit, that state lost all that money. It lost tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars because they didn't enter into the lawsuit that AG Rayfield and I entered into for our states. So there are huge consequences for these Republican AGs not protecting their people.
I believe one of the lawsuits that was filed was to stop the dismantling of federal agencies that support libraries,
Yes.
museums, and
Yeah.
minority-owned businesses. What's the status of that lawsuit? Where is that at right now?
Well, this is an important one too. It's certainly important in Arizona, I'm sure, same in Oregon. We just filed that lawsuit, and there were about 7 total agencies that the Trump administration just basically summarily shut down. Again, illegal and unconstitutional. So we've just filed that lawsuit, and I think we're waiting to see what the court is going to do with it.
Yeah, here in Oregon, so it was filed last Friday. So it's obviously, we are Thursday, so it's very short in that time frame, and so we're waiting for that to go through. The one thing I would know for Oregonians is they're thinking about how does that impact them. The federal funding that comes into the Oregon State Library then moves out into community. And there are 15 rural counties in Oregon that are going to be impacted by the loss of the funding dollars. And then there's a program that if you grew up in Oregon, you probably participated in. It was a reading competition in the elementary level where you have teams of 4 students that would compete against each other for basically the facts and details of specific books, encouraging reading in our fabric of our communities. And so that is one of the other programs that would be defunded under this, under these type of reductions.
Are there any Republican attorneys general that are interested in joining or have even just mentioned, like, hey, I'm thinking about, being part of these lawsuits?
I think it's a very difficult time in our nation's history where it is challenging to step outside of your party under circumstances like this. And I can't speak for Republicans under this circumstance. What I can say is for Republicans in the day-to-day world, as I walk through Oregon, there is no universal feeling about how we should proceed in this situation. I really do believe in the conversations that I have that everyone really does believe. And we're taught this in K through 12. Right? You follow the Constitution. You follow the law. No one is above these things. We have co-equal branches of government, right? You have an independent judiciary, a free press. These are really common things that are ingrained in us in Americans. And so I think there is, at least in Oregon, a lot of bipartisan support from individuals across that. Of course, you're going to have some Republicans that disagree, and I'm probably sure there's some Democrats, but I think on the whole, Oregonians are in support of making sure that we're defending our Constitution, and frankly, a lot of the funding that's coming into Oregon.
Are you guys really the funniest attorneys general? I
No.
think you guys should tell us some jokes.
So-
We're accountability journalists.
He is funny, I'm not funny.
Oh, that is not true. That is not true. Again, we have our unique bits of elements, right? She was a journalist reporter. I was a Jungle Cruise skipper at Walt Disney World, right?
Oh,
So
well,
we have
that
like
hasn't
these.
come across yet. I didn't, okay, that's interesting, okay.
So,
Yeah,
we
yeah.
have our tidbits.
Yes, we've
yeah.
got our tidbits for sure, but,
Well, is there anything else that you guys would like to add, expecting out of tonight's town hall in general? Anything that you've learned since last night?
No, I don't have anything.
no, except and I mentioned it earlier, and this did happen in Minneapolis, and to some degree in Phoenix. We always learn something new at these town halls, and sometimes we even learn that that one of the judge's court orders is being violated. And so if that's why, when we were in Minneapolis, several of the federal employees had not been rehired yet. And so we sort of stopped and said, okay, we need to get your information so that we can figure this out and figure out whether we need to go back in and get what's called a motion to compel. And so it's important to us, not just as a forum to allow people to speak out, but also for us to gather potential evidence in the cases that we have ongoing.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.